Good evening. Tonight I wanted to continue on the Vancouver discussion with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, and I'm going to be starting up at around 13 minutes and 47 seconds with the quotes and by Sam. And I just wanted to review briefly that where we are kind of at is that Jordan had been talking about trying to get more of a feel on what the commonalities are between different fundamentalist types of beliefs in the world that are either religious or non-religious, or the dogmas and dogmatism and the negative actions that flow out of that at times that we are all concerned about. I think that it's probably fair to say that there's not any of us that wouldn't agree that that's a problem when it happens. So they're talking about this, and let me just jump right in to Sam, what he says specifically. And it's just of interest to me. So I'll read it first, and then I wanted just to give some thoughts. Sam says, well, one has to acknowledge that there's something uniquely pernicious, at least potentially, about religious beliefs because they have the otherworldly variable, the supernatural variable, the you're going to get everything you want after you die, so this life doesn't matter issue. That allows for a kind of misbehavior that is especially, and he kind of pauses and Jordan jumps right in and says, so the claim would be that if you put forward axiomatically that God exists, then you can use that claim to justify whatever arbitrary atrocities your system might throw off. And Sam says, the only point I was making there was not all dogmas are created equal, but some dogmas are on their face more dangerous and more divisive. And Jordan responds, what I'm curious about specifically is, because it seems to me that the dogmas of USSR and the dogmas of Nazi Germany were as pernicious as any religious dogmas, and may also share important features with pernicious dogmas. And Sam says, kind of under his breath a little bit, like, oh yeah, or yeah, kind of seeming to be in agreement. And Jordan says, but it isn't clear to me from your perspective what those commonalities would be. And I really, really wanted to key in on this portion of the discussion because I think that we're beginning to see the point. If you recall, let me back up to the point at the beginning, including the introduction and everything. We're speaking of concerns of where we've seen some things break down in how we make sense of things in our society, and that seems to be problematic in our culture, and they've got different takes on things, but they've got a lot that they agree with. So they've come to terms with what they agree with, and now Jordan is just trying to kind of really gently seeming to lead Sam, that's one view that could be taken on this, to have him see that this is not unique to religion. It's a kind of a strange thing almost to say that it's a religious problem, and I think that I can kind of understand that on the one hand, because in religion you would expect it to be less of a problem, I guess, depending on the religion. But we take things especially hard when someone is supposed to be a good guy and then they're bad. If they're religious and they do something bad, it seems to hit and hurt all the more. I can give that kind of as a fair thing to say. I guess let me start at the beginning. Do we have to acknowledge? Sam says, well, one has to acknowledge. He's sounding so reasonable here, that there's something uniquely pernicious, at least potentially, about religious beliefs. Is that true? And here's the reason he gives. Because they have the otherworldly variable, the supernatural variable, the you're going to get everything after you want after you die, so this life doesn't matter issue. he's saying that was the reason, and that allows for kind of misbehavior. Now, keep in mind, we've talked about totalitarian regimes already, religious fundamentalist totalitarian regimes, not specific named ones, but that terminology was used, and then non-religious totalitarian regimes. And now we're talking about really like intense, it's a kind of misbehavior, like not just your normal misbehavior here, but a very distinct kind of, even like going above and beyond kind of misbehavior is the tone here with this quote. And I guess I just wonder, which religions are we talking about? I think that will become clear later, maybe a little more as you dig deeper. And I guess I'll wait on that because that's coming in the future. I'm not going to judge it yet, or make a judgment rather on that yet, because we're not there yet. I just try to keep to this, but I really don't know. You're going to get everything you want after you die. I'm not sure how that would justify any behavior on earth. Like, I literally can't think. Well, the religions that I know the best teach opposite of that. You kind of need to do good things now. You don't do the bad thing. You don't, especially if you think that there's an afterlife. Anyway, let's move on. Oh, yeah, and so to clarify there, only if a religion teaches that would that make any sense. So Sam would have, if he's not wrong here, he would have to be talking about a religion that has extra bad behavior coming out of it, because there's teachings within it that teach that you are going to get everything you want after you die. So anything that you would want to do is kind of like, there's something inherent within the teaching that would give off an impression to the followers of that religious set of beliefs that you can kind of have a free-for-all, because you're going to get everything you want after you die. Does anyone know what he's talking about? I'm being very sincere here, because if he's going to say it, I should be able to ask about it. Supernatural variable, the otherworldly variable. I don't know what he's referring to. I know that there's different beliefs teaching like there'll be like there'll be perfection, there'll be perfected bodies and no dying, and there's a lot of an eternal hope in a resurrected body that will not die. But I guess you could say that would be everything you want, but it's not spoken of in those ways. But it doesn't it just hit everybody? I don't understand why we don't have to learn more. We can't, in other words, we can't just take that at face value, because we don't even know what he's referring to there. It doesn't make any sense. So say you, in the example that I gave, say you believe that you're going to live forever and that you will have there'll be no more sin. You'll be in a perfected state. You will not be subject to the effects of a sinful and evil world. That is a good world. So why, if that's the hope and that's the promise and it's a gift that's been given by God at a very significant cost to an innocent, to God himself through his son Jesus, let's use that as an example. Why would that give anyone any right to do crazy arbitrary evils? It makes no sense. So it begins to look like we may be talking about using the examples of heretics of a religion in order to castigate that said religion, in order to put it down. But really, that can be said or accused or asserted, but you know what's really being communicated there? What's really being communicated is both that religion, say Jesus, for example, in his teachings, and the people that follow those teachings legitimately and Sam all agree that the abuses of such teachings are horrific. So really, we're all on the same page again, ultimately, in actuality. But talk about playing word games. Remember before? Remember he spoke of it's the only language game in which, we can play games and certain dogmas are allowed. I don't, if I literally didn't even plan to say that. That just kind of came to me that if we're talking about language games, who is playing a language game here? Because when you're really ultimately agreeing with Jesus and the apostles or the disciples, the ones that believed and died for what they knew was either true or a lie, they died literally knowing that. The ones that did it. So we're all on the same page. So something has to give here. Something has to explain this. And oh gosh, and then my ultimate conclusion. If you get to know me, you'll know that one of my favorite things to say is, what would explain that? If we're talking about different views here, whose view actually has an accurate explanation of that reality that we observe in the world that would explain it better? That's a thought to really ponder. It doesn't make sense from Sam's view, in a world where what you see is what you get, and we've just got the empirical hard sciences and our five senses to go by. That should be really cut and dry, but it doesn't explain why care so much and make up ideas like this that don't really fit. Boy, at the risk of sounding harsh, my goal here is to not just challenge that thought, but encourage people who are being accused of believing things that are really evil, but they're really not. They only are if they are. To the people that do abuse teachings and say that they're the thing, but then do opposite of the thing, that is horrible, and it does really hurt things. But it doesn't help when we've got outsiders observing some doing good, some doing really, really bad, and then acting like it's legitimate to judge it by the ones doing the bad. That doesn't make sense. Anyone is free to say one thing and do another. And like I've talked about before, when that happens, you know what to do. When someone says one thing but lives out another thing, you don't go by what they said, you go by what they did, if it's truth you're after. And this is where sometimes the true chin scratcher for me is, are people even really wanting the truth? Is my concern. I kind of don't know that they do. And then, what views here help explain someone maybe not wanting the truth? Because we're all saying that we do. So moving on. So when Jordan replies, the claim would be that if you put forward axiomatically that God exists, then you can use that claim to justify whatever arbitrary atrocities your system might throw off. So whatever arbitrary atrocities, that's rough stuff. And if people are saying, you know what, I'm going to do this horrifying thing in the name of God, I'm going to justify what I'm about to do here because of God. That would be awful. So none of us disagree on this either. If you did, I kind of don't know who is really doing this though, unless we're talking about a religion that actually teaches this. But to people that would just do this, doesn't this on its face sound so obviously wrong that and they're using this. So anyway, I just wanted to say it could be also opposite to the people that believe in a God nothing can just be written off as okay to justify anything. Really, it's the opposite, because we live in a world where we come under the ruling of the courts of the land, say the Supreme Court, the highest leaders of the country, or I don't know, United Nations. They're looking at the world. We're looking at the peaceful peacekeepers of the world, hopefully trying to keep a system of things at all of the levels. We've got levels, so the world, the country, the state, and then our smaller societies within the states, all being governed in a way down to your local police station, which is in place. And hopefully you have no run-ins with your police and your police stations and your courts and whatnot. But the point there is, we're all under these things, and there's a rule of law, and it is what keeps, unfortunately, because there's a lot of evil in the world. But I think the fear of reprisal, but the fear of getting in trouble, rather, of having to face the justice system, keeps people in line. Okay, I said that all for a reason. The reason I'm saying that is, so we all agree that that exists, and we all agree we have to listen. If you disagree with that, and if you act in your way you just want to act, then you have to face the consequences. So my point in bringing it up is religion. So say people choose to be in religion, the ones that are kind of under fire in these discussions a little bit, or being questioned or concerned, there's concern over them. They are adding on their own whole layer of a whole nother justice system, so to speak, a whole nother higher court, so to speak, a eternal court to have to answer to. So the people in religion have to answer to all of the same things that their fellow humans have to answer to, right? Plus more. How does this equate in Sam's mind, then, is my question here. How, when you've got like double duty here, you get to face all the laws of the land, plus the laws of God. You're having to face a God Almighty. How does that make you want to go commit arbitrary atrocities? And that was Jordan's wording there, to justify whatever arbitrary atrocities. I'm just saying, I'm kind of going like a level deeper than what, I know Jordan's just trying to understand where Sam's coming from, so in order to kind of come to that common ground in which they can therefore speak from, any kind of a basis there. So if anyone's doing this, I'm going to justify my arbitrary atrocities. Who's doing that? That's crazy. And if we are, okay, and so back to Jordan's point, I wanted to ask this. So if we are talking about arbitrary atrocities being done, maybe, are we talking about religious atrocities or non-religious based? People that are religious or people that are not religious? Do you see how what's good for the one is good? If we're concerned, let's be fair, we're concerned about atrocities. Mass murdering has been a topic that comes up so often. It comes up in these discussions. That's why it's fair to use. We're concerned, right? It's so ridiculous to say that we only ought to really care about the religious side. And also, so that, what justifies that? If religion is the thing that supposedly justifies the one, what justifies the other? And do you notice the balking at this? But this cannot just be brushed off. Moving right along. Let's keep going. The point, and he was just saying, the point I'm trying to make is that not all dogmas are created equal, but some dogmas are on their face more dangerous and divisive. My first thought is, well, no. I don't know that there are some that are more divisive and more dangerous. If people are, if millions, if hundreds of thousands, or one person, 10, dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions, people are dying, what what makes it, how can you say that it's worse? So Jordan is making the point. Sam is not wanting to seem to face this point. So I wanted to say no, or I might want to say, or yeah. Again, religious or non-religious. If what qualifies as worse? Wouldn't the one that causes more death be the worst? Worse ones? If we're doing scales here, levels of horribleness. Okay, so Jordan says, well, what I'm curious about specifically, notice the reiteration and the patience and the, he's being really interesting here. What I'm curious about specifically is because it seems to me that the dogmas of the USSR and the dogmas of Nazi Germany were as pernicious as any religious dogmas, and they may also share important features with pernicious dogmas. So religious and then just pernicious dogmas. And Sam's kind of saying, yeah, or oh yeah, seeming to kind of hear him, like you can't disagree. But then I think you might go on to disagree and explain why, but we'll get to that when we get to that. And Jordan just says, but it isn't clear to me from your perspective what those commonalities would be. And here's where I don't know if Jordan's trying to kind of get him on some hook there. And here I say he's being so gracious and generous. Perhaps he's not trying to trick him, but trying to get him to gently see, because I don't know that Sam will admit it. But in essence, you know why it's not clear to Jordan? Because from Sam's perspective, it can't be made clear. I think Jordan is clearly not really asking us so much, trying to make the statement that it isn't clear. Just so you know, your perspective on all of these atrocities, what the commonalities are, because there's literally no denying the facts. Assuming we're still caring about facts and rationality and logic, and there's commonalities. What it does is it takes away that it has to be the religious part of it. And when you see even more, and in recent history, you can't, I know that's balked at, but if that's what's being balked at from an atheist side, you can't try to say it doesn't apply when it does apply. Because then someone really is literally genuinely playing a game, language games. And you're playing games with truth. And you know what my greater concern is, other than being a person that would be considered probably a religious person that believes in God. And so you kind of, it's like, I just get concerned that we're supposed to just sit here and take that. And it's not just getting this kind of demeaning stuff a little bit. It's that, it's not just kind of being put down. It's more than that. It's assuming that people haven't heard a lot of this sort of thing before over the last couple of decades from atheists. And so it's assuming that here, obviously he has a very, very, very poor view of these people. And as I just broke down, it doesn't carry through. It's not really warranted. It actually lacks sense. It doesn't make sense. If it rings true with you, you must ask yourself why. But it lacks sense. Not just lacking moral sense, but just factual, logical sense. And the concern becomes, why not just say, that's not for me. This is what's really curious again. It may not be for you, but why can't you just let it be for them? People aren't coming after the people that aren't religious are free to do what they want. it's almost though like we're trying to take away the right for people who believe in religion just to live and let live alongside of them, and or to shame them somehow. And the sad part is, say you're successful, say you think you're right and you're successful at changing people's minds. Like, you hear these stories and stuff. You do hear stories of atheists becoming Christians too, but you do hear about a lot of people of religion leaving their religion and going to atheism. And I think it's because they feel like people wouldn't get on these kinds of platforms and be so bold, and they're educated and they've got degrees, and they're sensible, and they're often scientists, and so they can't be wrong, and they talk so calmly, kind of almost smugly at times, if I'm honest. I hate having to say that, but it's true. One has to acknowledge that there's something uniquely pernicious. I mean, it's acting as if you've got to agree with me. How can you possibly argue? And I'm just saying, you not only can argue this with more rational thought and logical reasoning than is given, but you almost must stand up for this, up against it. And people, I think, would do, people are willing to live alongside of Sam and do like a live and let live, if he wasn't going to try to do any harm. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from. The concern becomes not for the religious at some point, people of religion or whatever. There's a concern for the people who might play genuine language games or thought games, reality and truth games, more of a truth and deception game with themselves. I would just beg you, if you find that you're putting out views that when looked at closely and broken down don't tend to bring you like a peaceful, comforting feeling, in the sense that you feel supported by your views, because a view that is true and good and real in aligning with reality, I have so firmly believe and think that the correct views, the views that do that the most, will kind of look out for you in a sense. They kind of defend you in discussions like this. If you ever begin to feel so frustrated and almost angry, consider, couldn't it be my view that's causing this for me? It's not that it's that other person. It's not all those religious people. Now, if there are some religious people that are threatening your way of life legitimately, truthfully, and unfortunately we do see that in the world where we see it a little bit, then yeah, but again, guess what? We all want to be against that. That would be a bad thing at its core. So if you want to fairly judge, this is what I would encourage. If you don't want to back off of all religion, at least be more focused and fair on the ones that are doing these things. And please don't lump everything and everybody, because it's just not right and not fair. But more than that, you could be missing out on a truth because you're just so sure of something. But in so doing, you might find your views, like in this little tiny set of quotes here from Jordan and Sam, starting at 13 minutes and 47 seconds. You can go back and look at that, and it breaks down. I'm just saying it's not true. It's only true if it's true. So if it's seeming to break down, why would you want something that would break down? Why could you maybe potentially in the future look for something that would not break down? Because it's not about pushing through a view because you can or should or could. It's the view, the way this stuff works in this realm, or so to speak, or this area. It's not like the hard sciences here so much. It's that the way that these things work, that the most real views have an ease that comes with them. It's not that it's an easy road. I think whatever is true is not always an easy road or path, but often in life that things aren't. Some of the hardest things in life are really worth working for. But what I mean is, in discussions like these, I don't think you'll have such a bumpy road. It'll be much easier, and it'll appear like one side has an easier task than the other. And you want to make sense of that. And I think that's why the accusations of the earlier, my other videos, we talked about the language games. We're being accused of religion is the only language game, or, all of these pernicious, uniquely pernicious, supernatural, superstitious beliefs. It's got to be true. So anyway, that's all I wanted to share tonight. Thank you so much for listening. And I will be back with more of where I think Sam will respond to this again. And it'll be interesting to see how he talks in detail and goes into more explanation. Thanks so much. Have a good night. Bye-bye.